Good afternoon, everyone. As many of you know, my name is Prue Klein and I'm the Marketing Coordinator here at Wine Communicators of Australia. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from Sandy Hathaway, Senior Analyst, Wine Australia, and Peter McAtamney, Principal at Wine Business Solutions. In this webinar, Sandy will present the key findings and benchmark statistics from the 2021 Wine Direct Consumer Survey conducted in Australia by Wine Australia in collaboration with Wine Business Solutions. Peter will provide further insights from the data, including international benchmarking derived from an equivalent survey conducted by Wine Business Solutions in New Zealand and South Africa compared with US data. We have allowed plenty of time for questions you may have to be answered at the end of this webinar. However, feel free to send them through to me as they come to mind. You can do this via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. As usual, this webinar will be recorded and a link to the recording will be sent to you should you wish to watch the content again at a later stage. It is now my pleasure to hand over to you, Sandy, for today's presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Prue. I'll share my screen. That's not sharing the right screen, is it? Try that again. Right, that looks better. Thank you. Welcome, everybody, and thanks for your attention. Wine Australia has conducted the direct-to-consumer survey for the 4th year this year, and it's my pleasure to present you with a summary of the results. So just an overview of today, I'll give you a brief run through of the respondents, look at the wine sales performance, look at cellar door operations in a bit more detail. I'm going to take wine clubs as a case study in how to do benchmarking, and then just briefly a little bit on database sales. Before we start though, we got a little poll, which I'm hoping everyone will participate in. I wonder what you think. Which DtC channel performed the best in 2020-21? And if you can answer the poll using one of the radio buttons that should be popping up on your screen now, that would be great. And while you're having a think about that, we'll leave that one open. I'll just run through. So the survey, it's a difficult survey to get high levels of participation. We ended up with 123 complete valid responses this year, which was an increase on last year, but it is still a pretty small sample. It's about 6% of what we estimate the total number of wine businesses, and about 11% of sales value. And as you can see from the chart, medium-sized wineries were overrepresented. So the orange bars are the respondents compared with what we estimate the numbers to be in the population. So that means that the responses and the results of this survey are particularly representative of that medium-sized group, from about 5,000 cases to about 500,000, and less so at the two extreme ends. And I think this is probably because for that middle-sized group, they see the value of this kind of data, and they've got perhaps a bit more resources to collect it and to respond to the survey. Whereas the ones at the small end are perhaps struggling more to do that. And the very big ones, they're actually quite hard to get hold of because there's no single cellar door manager that you can talk to. Also, compared with the listings in the Australian Tourism Data Warehouse, we found that Victoria and South Australia had the most respondents, and Victoria and WA were probably overrepresented compared with the actual number of wineries in their states, while New South Wales was underrepresented. And the top 3 regions there, the Yarra, the Hunter and McLaren Vale. And congratulations to the Yarra with 13 respondents, and they worked pretty hard to get a good response rate from the region. But as you can imagine, it's pretty small numbers in terms of pulling, robust conclusions from the data at the level of an individual region. So we haven't done that very much. All right, now let's look at wine sales performance. So first of all, for our respondent group, overall wine sales were flat. We're talking 1% growth across in the financial year compared with the previous financial year. And note that this is an in-survey comparison. So that means we ask the respondents this year for their sales figures this year and last year, rather than comparing with last year's survey, which has, you know, potentially quite a different respondent group. So this is a more valid comparison. And as you can see, essentially the smaller the business, the greater the value growth. And that may well reflect their greater reliance on DtC and lower reliance on exports and wholesale sales. And we have consistently found that the smaller the business, the greater the reliance on DtC as a share of sales. And I haven't put that slide up today, but it's in the report. So as you can see here, DT sales greatly outperformed other channels with 17% value growth compared with that 1% overall figure, and 14% volume growth. And obviously every time value growth exceeds volume growth, you've got an increase in average value, which often is your indicator of profitability. And by contrast, Australian wine exports declined by 10% in value in 2021, and the domestic market overall was flat, according to IWSR. Now, thinking about that question in the poll, I'm not seeing any results up here. I'm not sure if I'm meant to be, but so I'm sorry, I don't know how the votes are going just at the moment. But if you look at this, what would we say? So cellar door and online have the greatest value growth, 22 and 23%. Online, much greater volume growth. So that looks pretty strong. On the other hand, when you see volume growth almost doubling value growth, you're going to see a drop in average sales value. And that you can see in this slide here. So this one is showing you the average case value. And the average case value for Wine Club was the highest, but it declined over the year. And online, as you can see, declined by 14% over the year. Overall, the average case value was $239, which includes GST, and that was up 3% compared with the previous year. So again, just thinking, well, if you looked at that, if you look at cellar door with virtually the highest average case value and a 16% growth, that might be the channel that you would say has done the best. But it depends how you're measuring, really. You might think, well, actually, I'm going with volume growth. Another thing to look at is the actual share of revenue, and cellar door, as you can see, has very much the lion's share of DtC, with nearly half. And it did increase again slightly this year compared with last year. So back up around that 44%, which was what we found in the previous year's survey in 2019. Okay. Prue, I don't know if you want to break in, but I can't see the results of the poll, so I don't know.
Sandy, we're going to quickly do it as a share screen for everyone. So just one moment and we'll put that up for you and everybody to view. Sorry, Sandy, we're just having a slight technical issue, but we'll be there in just a moment.
We've got to be brave with these things, haven't we?
We absolutely do. Okay, should we read it out?
Perhaps we won't worry about it, Prue.
I think it's just coming through now.
Oh, is it?
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Interesting. Okay, and I was hopeful we would get something like that, because that is not what we found. And I think there was a lot of anecdotal view that online was doing well. And as I said, you might consider that it was doing well with 44% volume growth on top of 50% volume growth that we found in last year's survey. But in terms of value, and particularly average case value, cellar door was doing a lot better than online and a lot better than Wine Club. So yeah, that's an interesting result. Thank you, Prue. Should I share my screen again now?
Yes, please.
Okay. Right, so we'll look at cellar door operations now, cellar door being the shining light. Now, just briefly first, this is visitor numbers, and I've just paused to reflect with you all. We're talking about the period from July 2020 to June 2021. So look, Victoria was in lockdown for over 4 months of that time, but actually the other states had no more than a few days of lockdown each, some none at all. But I think when we think about it now, there's a sense of a lot more lockdown than that. But even if you weren't in lockdown, the border restrictions and limitations on hospitality and retail did still have a huge impact. And I mean, WA was effectively locked in, weren't they? So, you know, I don't know how I would have predicted what visitor numbers would do, but what we're seeing there is overall just a small decline on last year. And this is the in-survey figures. So these are the same respondents telling us their visitors last year. So 1920 and then 2021. And in 1920, we had kind of 3 months of a national lockdown, and we saw a 23% drop in visitor numbers in that year. But now this year, only a 4% decline, but you can see quite, although they're small numbers, because as I said to you, those regions are small numbers, but you know, a big decline in Victoria, which you would expect, and a big increase in the Hunter, which had the biggest decrease last year. So they're coming back from that kind of impact. So this is really just to show you, you know, just how difficult was this year and how difficult to predict what things would do. And then surprisingly, perhaps, visitor management didn't change much. So the remaining slides in this section are based on comparing this year's survey with last year's survey, which is perfectly appropriate with these sorts of generic questions. So we did find 1 in 4 respondents not counting visitor numbers, and that was more than last year. Still less than half say that they're collecting contact details always or usually, which is perhaps a little surprising when they were meant, you know, or when you had to collect contact details for COVID reasons, but then the QR code doesn't really help you, does it? And then perhaps most importantly here, what we looked at, the majority said that bookings were encouraged, but there was some flexibility for walk-ins. And that was, you know, you can see from this dark orange bar, the overwhelming majority of respondents were saying that, and only 8% requiring all tastings to be pre-booked, with that being higher in New South Wales, you know, quite a bit higher. And the other dramatic effect, probably the biggest effect in the survey, was the charging for standard tastings. So the proportion of respondents charging for standard tastings went up from 58% in last year's survey to 73%, with WA having the highest proportion at 83% and New South Wales the lowest at 68%. And in this chart, you've actually got 3 years worth of survey data, and you can see how the amount charged has dramatically changed as well. So in 2019, 57% of people were charging $5, and now in 2021 it's only 14%. And the $10 line has increased inversely, and that's led to an increase in the average value as well. The other thing we found very strongly was that fewer wineries reimbursed tasting fees. So last year, even if you charged it, most people could get a refund on it. But this year, with the combination of the proportion that were providing reimbursements decreasing and the proportion charging increasing, we end up with 30% of wineries now charging, or in 2020-21, charging a non-refundable fee for a standard tasting. And I think that's probably big move into a positive future, compared with 15% last year. Premium tastings also increased in value. These are very hard to quantify because people have so many different answers and perhaps a different range of tastings. But the thing that struck me most about this year's figures was that drop in the number of people who gave a variable answer. So the number of people who said that they had a range of tasting prices for premium tastings dropped by half, from over 30 down to what, about 15%, which was a big difference, suggesting that perhaps there was a deliberate reduction in the number of options being provided to visitors by wineries. And the share of casual bar tastings declined further as well. Again, you can see quite a big drop over 3 years in casual bar tastings, going from nearly 60 down to 20, and similarly seated, the two seateds put together now being 2/3 of all tastings. I guess we thought that we would be measuring post-COVID, but of course we weren't. Whether we are in 2021, 22, we don't know yet. But yeah, we don't know now whether these changes will revert once COVID is no longer a main consideration, or whether this is now a permanent change. All right, and finally, responses to COVID in terms of the cellar door were amplified. So last year we asked people, what change were you making due to COVID that you were still doing? And we repeated the question, and the results showed an amplification of most of the previously identified changes, particularly taking bookings and charging for tastings. And so over 70% of respondents indicate that they're now doing seated tastings only. A similar percentage report taking bookings, and over 50% have started charging for tastings. So this is really quite a dramatic change in business model in a short time. All right, so I'll move on now to looking at wine clubs. And if you want the actual outcomes of the wine club, you know, the qualitative stuff around what people are doing with wine clubs, it is all in the report. But what I want to do here is use the opportunity to give you an example of benchmarking. The main reason for me that we do this survey is not to get these national figures. I mean, yes, they're important, and it would be my dream to get really good figures at each region level. But the main purpose is to help individual wineries understand their business better, and perhaps, you know, as a respondent said to me, you know, this has been great because it's made me look at my figures, it's made me capture them and start analysing them. And that's really why we do it. And so every participant has received an individual benchmark report. This is just an extract on the screen, and this is only half of it. The idea being that, you know, if you understand these benchmarks, you can look at how you're doing and what goals you want to set, and then you can measure improvement. If you get a new software system, if you employ a new staff member, you know, if you change your tasting fee, how do you know whether that change worked if you don't look at your benchmarks? So we can give you about 30, or you could do it yourself, but you can produce at least 30 benchmarks from the following 9 sort of key data points or data sets. This is all you need, and this is what we ask for in the survey. But a lot of people do find this very difficult, and not that many respondents, even out of our 123 highly motivated respondents, could answer every single question accurately across 2 years. So I'm actually going to skip this next poll, I think, in the interests of time. But I will show you a set of 5 wineries, and these wineries are all actual respondents from this year's survey. This is their actual data. And I want you to just have a look and think to yourself which one of those you think is performing the best, or performed the best in that year. Or if you don't want to do that, or if it looks a bit too much, just look at one of them, perhaps one that is your size category, and see whether you think they had a good year. And I'll just give you a few seconds to look at that. So even if we don't do an actual poll, please perhaps jot down or make a note of your answer, and I will reveal all. Maybe you'll recognize yourself in there. I think there are quite a few respondents in the webinar today, and I thank you again for taking the trouble to do this, and I hope you find it valuable. All right, let's go to the overall results. So these are the benchmarks for the overall respondents. And to me, you can see from the heading, I think that wine clubs had an okay year, but I don't think they had a great year. Revenue grew by 10%, yes, but wine club's share of total DtC revenue declined slightly, at least for the respondents. The average case value was the highest of all of the DtC channels, but it declined by 5%. Net club member growth rate was good at 27%, but the average value per member declined by 14%. So yeah, I guess, again, it depends what you measure. If your goal had been, I'm determined to get my member growth rate up and I'm determined to have the highest or increase my case value, you might be happy. Well, actually, sorry, not if you wanted to increase it because the case value declined. But now thinking about these wineries again, when you looked at those, I hope you would have said to yourself, how on earth do you compare these? I mean, the numbers are all over the place. They're, you know, how do we compare someone who does 445,000 with someone who does 2.6 million or 5.5 million? But once we do benchmarks, we can do exactly that. So I've now given you the benchmarks for each of those 5 wineries. And if it's shaded pink, it's higher than that overall average that I showed you on the last slide. So if you look at that now, which winery do you think performed the best? Again, you can all shout very loudly at the monitor and I might even hear you. But just again, ask yourself, did your view change now that you look at this? And how do you decide? Now, there are some odd things in this data. Winery D, for instance, 7 shipments per member per year. Seems a bit high. It's possible. But then average value per shipment is only $63. So yeah, either they're sending out lots of pretty small shipments, or maybe they made a mistake in their shipment number. But only looking at data in this way will you work that out. Again, not to take too much time on this, I don't think there's really an absolute right answer on this. And I'd be very pleased to have a debate with people on it. But for my money, I quite like winery C. I think that average case value, average value per member looks solid. Yes, the average case value declined, but only slightly and certainly less than the overall. So perhaps in a really competitive environment, that wasn't a bad result. Anyway, you can make your own decisions on that one. So, and finally, just very briefly, because there isn't time to do all this justice, there's a lot more slides in the report. Database generated sales were, I'm going to call them surprise winners. Maybe I'm the only one who was surprised. These are sales that come from you targeting your database. So it's different from online where they just come to your website and order something. These ones you've targeted with a phone call or an email or something like that. Based on the results, database sales only account for about 2% of total sales, but 10% of DtC sales. And they grew by 15% with growth in average case value of 4%, at least for our respondents. The average value per contact is pretty low, but when you look at having a number of contacts of nearly 10,000 on average, it's pretty reasonable turnover. So the only sour spot, I suppose, is reducing the average value per contact. But to grow your database by 15% in a year where perhaps you didn't have as many visitors to your cellar door is really good going. And I wonder whether this is the answer in terms of why these sales did well. Now, what I've got here is comparing the frequency of contacting your contacts from your database. We didn't report on that last year, but 2 years ago in 2019, you can see that the monthly or more is 39%, but now monthly or more is 60%. So this is a big increase in the number of contacts. Again, perhaps making sense if you're in lockdown, you can't do anything else, or you've put that investment into your digital sales. And so it seems to have paid dividends. And finally, we asked respondents to nominate the most important practice that they've introduced during the year that they intend to keep doing. And probably not surprisingly, if you think about the earlier stuff, 1/4 of the nominations were for changes to tastings. And this seems to be something that people do propose to continue doing in future. You can see the other ones up there. A big strategic focus on investment in DtC was certainly identified as a key to success, which I think is a great outcome. And that really is a summary of the presentation too. DtC outperformed other sales channels. Cellar door performed most strongly as wineries adapted to the COVID environment. Wine club sales grew, but average value declined. So I don't think wine clubs had a great year, but database sales performed well with an increased investment in communication. And finally, that the strategic focus on DtC customer experience has been identified by most respondents as a key to success going forward. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sandy. We'll now hand over to Peter for the second part of today's presentation.
Sorry, I'm just having a bit of difficulty getting to the full screen button and making the menu pop down. It doesn't seem to want to do that. Okay. Does anybody know how to make that pop down? Anyway.
Hi, escape.
Sorry? Oh, okay. No, I don't want to do it. Just can't get to the button, that's all.
Do you want to unshare, Peter, work it out and then reshare again?
Okay. That might be the way to do it. No, I just can't access that button because the toolbar is over the top. All right, look, I might just go with it in this form.
Just one moment, Peter.
Yep.
You can drag the toolbar to the top of the screen.
Oh, can you? Okay, let me try and do that. Ah, gotcha. There we go. Is that better? Is that full screen now?
Perfect.
Okay. Sorry about that, everybody. All right. Well, over a decade ago, when we first started benchmarking wineries across Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, it was very clear to us that people wanted to move away from this model of being seen as some sort of free sampling station to being premium, professional, profitable tourism destinations. And it might have been the Americans who first discovered that you could take people's credit card details and just keep sending them wine until they beg you to stop. But I would argue that it is Australian wine businesses that have really perfected the art of the wine club. And I'll show you what I mean by that a little bit later on in the presentation. And then everybody got on board social media and, more importantly, how to sell wine using email. And we're just starting to see now businesses that are really starting to work out how to use marketing automation to scale their sales. And we had a pretty good place to start with this, in that Silicon Valley Bank in the US was asking all the right questions, I felt. And I knew that if we just asked those same questions across Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, that we'd have a pretty good read of what was going on internationally. And Sovos is a platform, ship compliant it's called, that most US wineries use. And both Silicon Valley Bank and Ship Compliant are an absolute wealth of information. So if you're not downloading and watching and listening to everything these guys say, I'd strongly recommend that you do. So in terms of what the benchmarks needed to be, we knew that it was about looking at what needed to change and the roadblocks that needed to be removed, that it was about moving people from a standing situation to a seated one, from a product demonstration to a pre-booked, pleasure-based, rewarding learning experience, and from a free sample to entertainment that people would actually want to pay for, from what I call pour and hope to a well-presented opportunity to buy wine and join your commitment club, and from having no clear plan of attack to customer experience blueprints and DtC strategic plans are the real heart and soul of the workshops and webinars that we've been running during this COVID time. And I guess the kind of gift of COVID, as it were, is that it has taken a lot of people down this pathway to prosperity through forcing people to make some of these changes. But the real moment of truth, of course, is when people are interacting with one another. And that's why the single most important thing that you can be doing now is talking to hospitality people before they all get back in their ways, their long hours and their questionable lifestyle and so forth, and convincing them how much better they would be working for you 9 to 5 on a good salary and with sign-up bonuses, etc., than they would be doing what they're doing before. That's the thing. And when this is Zoe and Rollo Crittenden, and if they're listening in, I hope I'm not embarrassing them, but when their dad and Peter Drainage from Brokenwood and a whole bunch of our clients took her advice, went to South Africa, saw what they were doing and changed the experience, they didn't increase their sales by a few percent, they got the predicted result. They increased their sales by 6 times. And equally, we knew from research that they could expect that their club sign-up rates would go up by 6 times as well. So we were rather curious when we saw the data this year, and the Australian data didn't really reflect that. In New Zealand and South Africa, those businesses that participated increased their sales by 3 times, doing structured seated tastings versus standing around the bar. So that made us wonder about what's going on with Australian businesses. And you can't discount the effect of culture here, because you would never in Afrikaans culture, for example, be informal with somebody that you weren't formally introduced to. The extent to which Australians are comfortable with being casual is pretty much unique to Australia. However, 5-star service is a global idea, and 5-star service always wins. When we actually dug down into the numbers, it was really more about a bunch of very big West Australian wineries still doing bar service. But there's also a question of interpretation that I think is really critical here. When we could all move around before the Delta variant put us back into lockdown, I was asked to go and visit all 18 wineries in a particular wine region. And they're all doing the same 3 things wrong. For a start off, they weren't charging enough. And I believe that if you were charging somebody $5 or $10 to have that same awful experience where you get a splash of wine, a rote-learned product description spouted off you and left alone with your thoughts, that's adding insult to injury rather than adding value. And they were tasting every single wine that they produce, every one of these wineries. I mean, the whole art of selling and the secret of success of many of those great brands we talk about in our newsletters is offering people as little choice as what you possibly can, whilst always making them feel like they've got all the choice in the world. But I think worst of all, they were thinking that a seated tasting was turning a barrel upside down and putting bar stools around it, where, as you can see here, by the time people put their stuff on top of the barrel, there's not any room to do anything. And no one over 40, particularly somebody that's played contact sport, should ever be sat in one of those things. So what is DtC when you're doing it properly? Well, I say it's heightening. I like that word better than premiumisation. Deepening, and certainly the research showed that those people that offered experiences, even when they were just, basic tour of facilities, did substantially better than those wineries that did not. But above all, it's about personalising and building upon your relationships with existing and prospective customers, trade and media as well. And I was talking to Terry Peabody. Now, Terry owns Craigie Range, and as many of you will know, Craigie was voted the best winery in Australasia to visit in that competition that I'm the global chair of, the 50 best vineyards. And I was saying, Terry, it's a bit of a shame that you weren't able to maintain your sales force in Australia, but the guys at Jovel, Mezzanine, are doing an awesome job. And he said, yes, they are, but that's not really where our focus is. And he pointed at the ground and he said, look, our focus is here. And I thought, wow, 120,000 case business with a global footprint, and their focus is at cellar door. And this is not Craigie's cellar door, by the way, although it is the same cast. This is a business called Phantom Creek Estate in British Columbia that we've talked about extensively in our workshops. And really, I think that's what a lot of people would want to see if they visited a cellar door. And it's really interesting looking across countries, I think, to look at how different they are in terms of who does DtC. As you'd expect, DtC is predominantly about companies in the 5 to 50,000 case range. But in Australia, we've got a lot of businesses in the 50 to 500,000 case range that are focusing on and really winning with DtC. And the reason for that is not that Dan Murphy's won't let them make money. That's a big misconception. Dan Murphy's is often the most profitable channel for our customers. It's that selling to Dan Murphy's ensures that you can't make money out of all your other channels that really is the problem. But looking across to the US, if you look first at those very small businesses, 27% of shipments in the US are at above $100 a bottle. And I can see almost infinite opportunity for these sorts of businesses in Australia. If you want to be very premium and very small and very direct, like, for example, the Beckers down in McLaren Vale or Lakes Folly or the Noons still, I guess. There's a lot of opportunity for that because Australians have never been sitting on more cash than they are now. And, they want something to spend it on. But big companies, I think, are even more fascinating because, and this is, we've been doing this for 10 years and we keep seeing the same results, that South African companies, big companies, are twice as good as Australian companies and US companies 3 times at doing direct to consumer. If you look at a business like, for example, Vintage Wine Estates in the US, 300 million Australian dollar turnover, 30% of revenue direct, and they're busily buying up any business with a database. So there's big opportunities right across the board that just not every size of business in Australia is currently taking advantage. The other thing that this survey gave us an opportunity to do, which I thought was really interesting, was that for the first time ever, we had a significant group of people who did not have a cellar door participating. In previous years, they'd seen the word cellar door and they'd run away. This year, we're able to compare data, and it wouldn't be too much of a surprise to see that the average business with a cellar door is selling nearly 10 times as much wine as those that don't. So if you were just looking at Australian data, you could conclude that that wasn't an opportunity. However, we have clients in South Africa, and there were businesses that participated in the survey that are very strong businesses direct without a cellar door. So there is a model for that, but it's a whole lot of other work that needs to be done to achieve that. But the key thing is that once you start drifting out of what I call the zone we own, the cellar door, the great assets that we've got there to build relationships and move into the line of sight of online retailers, well, then the risk is that price competition starts to come into play. And it was fascinating to me seeing the results from the Australian data this year because they matched exactly the US experience. And that price for those online sales were down about 13%. Now, if that's just simply selling more cheaper wine off the same sort of cost base, that's still a problem because it's still teaching people to buy cheaper wine. But if this is actually hard discounting, then that's a big problem. And one of the best additions to the survey this year, I felt, was Sandy's question about discount levels. And what it shows us is that discounts don't make any difference whatsoever. So that's a flipping disaster for some of those businesses that I've visited, where they've got a salad door manager who's clearly never spoken to their accountant, who gives a 30% discount to join a mailing list. I mean, if you're thinking about what discount level for your top level of your club and trying to choose between 15 and 20, that might be half your profit. And freight is even worse, because what we found in the survey was that those people that charged a fair and flat rate for freight dramatically outperformed those who gave it away. So that really is disastrous and could be the cause of a drop in profitability or a lack of profitability of your sales. And what other research confirms is that people will do just about anything for free freight, including a third of people, more or less, in this One Direct study saying they'd join your club. So always better to use freight as a lever than just expect to give it away. The other thing that we found that really stood out to me was the absolute correlation between being open and selling wine. The average enterprise that is a 7-day-a-week cellar door in Australia today is a $2 million business. So this is serious. So everybody needs to be involved, including top management, and thinking about how to optimize that. And Sandy said to me, look, do we really need to have this question in again this year? And I said, well, yeah, I know the answer's always been the same, but yeah, the answer's always 2.2. You know, those businesses that have dedicated staff sell twice as much wine as those that don't. And so therefore it's not chicken or egg. If you have a cellar door and it's open, you can and you should employ the professional people to really make it work. As Sandy pointed out, you know, if I'm thinking about low-hanging fruit here, the single most important opportunity that I see being missed is we've still got less than half of people routinely collecting contacts. And yet we've never had more possibility to do that. Wine clubs, nearly a third of people told us that they still don't have a wine club. So that's just kissing goodbye, according to our data, to about $400,000. Now, something really interesting we found was that when people were cut loose, really the further away you were from a regional population centre, the better that you did. I'm going out to Hilltops in 2 weeks and, you know, it's a 4.5-hour drive out there. And conversely, when you look at poor Victoria, this is looking at the data the other way, this is how much visitor numbers declined. Victoria struggled as much as South Africa and the US, who, rather than just being in lockdown, had the full brunt of the virus to deal with as well. But one of the things I'm most interested in is customer lifetime value. And look at the extreme differences in the result. Average life of customer is just your attrition rate divided by 1. And the last time I drove down to the Great Southern, I didn't see a car on the road for the last 2 hours. So when people arrive there, they have this tremendous sense of arrival. They get treated like royalty. The wines are absolutely awesome. There are producers down there that are absolutely amongst the best in the country and great value for money. So people generally tend to want a lot of them. And they basically never leave that club until they pass off this mortal coil. Whereas if you look down the table to the bottom to the US average, they on average ask people to buy a hell of a lot more. Napa would be 2 or 3 times that number. Their club conversion rates are, you know, up over 8 on average, 8%. And consequently, those club members aren't really worth that much over the life of the customer compared to the Barossa or Hunter or Margaret River. So that's why I say that Australian wine businesses may have done this a little bit better than what their US counterparts actually have, but there's a bit of a balance there. The other thing, you know, that is the easiest thing that you can possibly do is actually count people. And what really stood out to me is that over 60% of people said that they now have a booking system, but only 7% of people said that they were using that booking system to count visitors. And without that denominator, there's not a lot of this analysis that we can actually do to work out where we are, how we compare, and how we can improve. The other thing that I noticed was that there's been a drop off in club conversion rates. Like I say, you can be too aggressive with club conversion rates, but club conversion rates were at 6% for a long time and dropped off to 4% in all the rush around people opening up again. That's something that I'd really have my team focused in on, because that's a 50% difference in terms of the money that you're generating from new club member acquisition. And look, I could talk all day about software, but I've got exactly 2 minutes. So what I'd say is that everybody wants a piece of software now that does all of this. However, those people that said that they were using CRM and had CRM software are typically selling twice as much wine as those that are not. And yet still, when you look at what people say they're using for a CRM, apart from the specialized wine club management CRM platforms, most of the rest of the other applications nominated only had limited CRM functionality. But the thing that really stands out is that those people who are using marketing automation software are not only achieving really great results, they're really happy with it. And I remember when Bruce Mitchington said to me at the DtC symposium in California 5 or 6 years ago now that they were implementing Infusionsoft, I remember thinking, you are going to kick some backside, and certainly to Bilk do. The final thing that really stood out for me was that after doing 3 surveys in the last 12 months, so we've done the 2 DtC surveys in conjunction with Wine Australia. We also did our own separate digital survey. So 450 answers, so pretty strong. People are saying overwhelmingly that they'd sooner use a generic shopping engine as the back end of their website than most specialized wine club software. So the big thing to be asking any provider is, what's their ongoing investment strategy? Because that really has been the problem. There's no problem getting people interested in the wine sector. There's a big problem in those businesses actually making money out of it. So look, that's all we've got time for. There's a huge amount of information in the international report about all the different platforms, the pros and cons, etc. And that probably is the one main reason to buy it. So that's me done. So questions, please.
Absolutely.
We don't seem to have any questions. So
no, which surprises me. Thank you, Peter and Sandy. We've got an absolute wealth of knowledge to ask questions to at the moment. So please don't be shy. Send your questions in. We've got a couple more minutes to ask them to Peter and Sandy. So yeah, please do send them in. But while we're waiting, wow. Oh, we already have a question.
Prue, can I please just throw in that that with the report, you know, it's on the website, and Peter might like to follow up on his report as well. But also that we are happy, if anyone is listening who didn't participate in the survey, but they would like one of those benchmark reports, I am very happy to do that for them. And they need to contact us either by the email, which is market.insights@wineaustralia.com, or which you can put in the follow-up email, I guess, or yes. There's a book an analyst session on our website where you can basically have an individual half-hour session with me or Angelica or Peter in the Market Insights team to look at your own results, or just to talk about what data is available.
Fantastic, Sandy. And yes, we can certainly include those details when we send a link to the recording for everyone tomorrow. We do have a few questions.
Good.
So I'll open it up to both yourself, Sandy, and Peter, and you can decide who responds. So the first one's from Sarah, and she's asking, what does a dedicated CRM offer that a wine club system, i.e. Commerce 7, doesn't? Let's throw one for you, Peter.
Yeah, well, that's the really interesting thing. I mean, Commerce 7 has emerged as a clear winner. And the interesting thing about Commerce 7, if we just go back to that slide, is that it does all that and it is a booking platform. So that's pretty cool. So that's where they are at the moment. The answer is not much. It's really a matter that a lot of the, I guess you'd say, legacy software platforms just haven't been able to keep up, whereas Shopify is the business back end of 500,000 e-stores. Now, you're not going to be able to do everything that you can do on Commerce 7 without some plug-in software, but there are applications like Bloom, who are out of Oregon, that is a wine club software platform that you can plug into Shopify. But for most people, if they simply want everything integrated in one place, then Commerce 7 is a pretty good solution. I should make it absolutely clear that we don't receive commission from anybody ever. My job is simply to provide unfettered advice, and that's what we do in the international report.
And I don't know much about these softwares at all, but it always strikes me in the survey how wide the range is that people are using. There just doesn't seem to be much of a critical mass around some software, which would perhaps allow it to start being a better solution for the industry. And also that people always ask the question, so if there, you know, if there is a market, Peter, I think people definitely need advice, and I think from what I hear, it's worth getting that good advice and taking your time in setting up whatever you set up. And let's try and get rid of this mishmash of all these different systems, none of which are making people very happy.
Yeah, well, sadly, what needs to be considered is that a lot of these people are getting venture capital. And so all of those sort of common sense market dynamic things like, oh, hang on a minute, we've only got, 9,000 businesses in the US and 3,500 in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, times X dollars a month is, well, not even really a business for anyone. That doesn't stop people coming in with a solution. And it's great that they do that, and that they're, operating a business that really hasn't got any potential for ever actually making money. But it becomes a huge problem when you then talk to the owners of those businesses and they say, well, look, we're not really worried about continuing to upgrade that thing anymore, and some poor people are stuck with it.
Yeah.
So that becomes
Common
the issue.
scenario.
Or when you get people that really don't need to be in the space coming in because they want to do everything and then they don't do it very well and then really annoy people. So there's one or two people that are really committed and really good right now. Certainly Commerce 7 is one of them. With Wine's the only Australian business that's still sort of tipping in money and still trying their hardest. But their score isn't perfect either, whereas a lot of the other businesses has just all gotten too hard. Wine Direct's the big one. Wine Direct is huge, but Wine Direct has waved the flag and said, look, we can't do this anymore, so we're going to use Big Commerce as that back end. Big Commerce being actually an Australian business run by a couple of Australians who didn't care about Australia and listed on the New York Stock Exchange instead. So they're the back end to about 50,000 stores, and Shopify's 500. So if you're thinking about, well, who's going to have the most engineers working on the product, then you know what the answer is.
Peter, we've got a couple of other questions in that same e-commerce point of sale, so I'll just quickly ask them. So one question is, can you recommend a good software for rewards loyalty that can be used across point of sale and online sales channels?
Not off the top of my head, but it is interesting that, and I can track it down. There is a business in the US that wanted to pair up with Wine Direct. I actually stood while they're having the conversation, which is quite funny. But they had a brilliant rewards program out of the restaurant industry. And to me, it makes eminent sense to be only using somebody who's really done the hard yards with this, because you know how many member rewards programs we've been involved with. It didn't really make any sense. There's also somebody that I work with in South Africa on research and other things, not on technology, who's building a reward component into their platform. So depending on where they go with that, that could be interesting as well. But I'm not aware of anybody that's got a rewards system who's currently operating in the Australian market, but there's certainly room for that, because loyalty rewards are just absolutely brilliant. I mean, I just love every time you go down to the garden centre and you think, oh my God, I've just dropped another $100, but everything's fantastic because you've just got a $5 voucher. so we don't do enough of that. There are people that do run rewards programs in Australia. I think it's just a matter of the right people hooking up on that. I'm sure Richard Owen with Wine, if he's listening in, will be having to think about this at least.
Yeah. And in regards to wine clubs, someone's asked wine club software you'd recommend for a small wine business setting up a wine club for the very first time.
Well, the really interesting thing is that most of the businesses using Commerce 7 are tiny, and it doesn't really make any sense in a way, in that in order to leverage all the features, you really need to have somebody who's working the thing the whole time. So it's not really the case that any of these wine industry specialized platforms are only for larger businesses, because they don't actually charge a lot of money, relatively speaking, relative to that $2 million that most people want to be if they're not already. So I don't think that you would say that any of the wine industry products are not for small business, other than, of course, Easy Wine. Which cost a heck of a lot of money if you were ever to want to implement that.
Yeah, absolutely. And another question in regards to your own personal research, I guess, Peter, someone's asked if you've done any in-depth analysis of the e-com platforms, either generic or wine specific, that's out on the market.
Yeah, well, when we sit down with clients, I recently had a session with Vas Felix, and I don't think you'd get a more demanding client than that. They said, we hope that you understand some of the platforms. And I said, well, I'm only going to come here if I feel that I understand all of them, insofar as I know that they exist and that people are using them. So that's why we do the digital survey, to find out what people are using, so that I can then take a good hard look at what they are using. For example, this time around, there's one business out there using something called Netto, which is actually a B2B platform, but they're absolutely thrilled with that. that was news to me, but if you look at the actual site for that product, it covers off just about every base that a winery would want to with their DtC software.
Yeah, great. We might also, if you're happy, Peter and Sandy, just share your contact details as part of that email that goes out tomorrow. So if anyone does want to follow up on any of these aspects, they can with you directly.
Yeah. If they want to buy the international report, it's not much.
There we go. And any point of sale systems that's leading the way for wineries?
Well, again, it's one of the really interesting things actually is that I saw sort of a match off between Vend and Shopify. And interestingly, Vend comes out in front just because if you use Shopify, you have to use all their hardware and other bits and pieces. So Vend for small business is really good because it has inventory. And it only doesn't work if you've got a full restaurant. You need that kind of POS capability.
Okay.
But Vend is very good in terms of being a cloud-hosted software platform that connects to Xero and all the other applications that you might want to link up.
Great, wonderful, thank you. Sandy, a question for you. Where is the best, most recent cellar door research that can support the survey findings?
I don't understand the question, so I guess Sandy's probably struggling with it too.
Are you sort of saying, well, where do you go with this? I mean, I think certainly I am not an expert in the area of DtC, and I do think that businesses, if they want to invest, then you've got to look at consultants who are out there who can support your business. I don't know that there's a lot written. Peter does have some on reports, definitely. There's, as he said, the taking the direct route report is actually, it's not just a plug for Peter. It's the only report that I know of that you can buy on DtC in Australia. Again, you can look at an analyst session with us and we can talk about what exactly are you looking for and where can we find it. Because there are probably more things that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head. We do have a link to a webinar recording on our website from last year, which is free for our levy payers, but you would have to have a login to our website to view that. But yeah, I usually take the point of, I go as far as the data, and I hope that people will say, all right, data is first. You've got to get the data, you've got to get your benchmarks, and then you look at it and you say, all right, well, clearly I'm failing in the wine club area, or I want to improve in invest in cellar door. What do I do next? That's where you've then got to perhaps get some professional guidance.
Yeah, what I would say in terms of, you know, who does what and what I do and so forth, there are people out there who really specialize in digital communications and in social media, and obviously Trish Barry's a player in that space. She's got a show on later tonight. But if you're setting up a cellar door and you want to do it properly, I mean, you know, as I said, I'm the global chair of a competition to find the 50 best places on earth to visit. I have sold wine in 45 countries. I've consulted to people on their cellar door and set up in dozens of countries around the world, and have worked with most of the good businesses in Australia, with, you know, Vas Felix, where Molly Duker, lots, you know, lots of very different businesses on what the ideal setup for their cellar door is. So can help.
Wonderful. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Sandy. And we've got the one last question here, again, to do with, I think, further references, resources. Do you have a good resource, advice, or tool how to get the coveted sign-ups at the end of a tasting? Turn a generally enjoyable experience into a more profitable one, i.e. practical advice to increase the conversion rate at cellar door.
You know, that's what we've been pushing like hell, because one thing we noticed is that, you know, 5-star hotels during COVID, they were actually doing it. They were actually putting out this piece of A3 collateral that was beautifully set out, that had the whole offer, the different wines, the prices, the club offer, where to sign up, everything. And you know what? As soon as things open up again, they took those away and gave them back the dirty old menus again. So, but I think the best of our clients, and people that are not our clients, like the Swinging Bridge out at Orange, I mean, that's what they really master, is the experience itself, but also the marketing collateral that goes along with it, I think is almost as important, because the more heavy lifting the presentation materials can do, the less actual selling that the salespeople need to do to support. They can just then focus on building a relationship, and then the collateral, if it's, you know, all set out properly, does most of the hard work for you.
And just to plug on the numbers there, like I wouldn't be too driven by just numbers there. That, and certainly in the US, they have a much higher sort of raw sign up rate, but then they get a lot more withdrawals down the track. So you have to, you know, I'm not giving you the answers, but just saying definitely look at qualified sign-ups that are going to stick with you, not people that you've hard sold into writing their name down so that they got their tasting fee back, and then they'll probably never actually buy, or they'll cancel their club membership as soon as they get the chance. So there's, you know, there's trade-offs to be made. But yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have the answer on that.
Quality versus quantity.
Yeah, and it's also about, you know, having a process. Like the best operators will have a sign at the door saying, join our club and get X% off. And then next to the decanters, join our club and get X% off, so that by the time you go to the checkout, there's somebody getting X% off. So, you know, you know, how you set up the theatre really is the whole art of the thing. And that's what all our consulting is about.
Right, now I've got a couple of extra questions that have snuck in, if you're happy just to go over a couple of minutes.
Sure.
One is, any tips on how to grow the mailing list for a small winery that currently doesn't have a cellar door? That's a little bit more challenging.
Yeah, it really is. I mean,
yeah.
I think even if you look at wine selectors, for example, you know, they're the people that have the stands in the airport. I think even online retailers realize that a point of primary customer acquisition is really vital. So if you don't have a cellar door, it's about events and making sure that every single thing that you do is pre-booked, and getting those names. With a really good digital content strategy, you can definitely get people engaged, and you can definitely use your social media to convert people to a database. And things like competitions are absolutely wonderful, but people have got to be joining that competition for the right reason. It's always better to be able to actually engage with people and then continue the relationship. So that primary point of customer acquisition for any business is pretty important.
Some of, I think, what we're merging into is really genuinely marketing, isn't it? It's good marketing, and I don't know what position people are in, but I mean, there are marketing courses you can do, and I think that's probably part of the picture, to have really sound marketing strategies, rather than sort of quick tips just around sell a door necessarily, or around something. It's what Peter said is fundamental good marketing strategy, and you'll get some of that in good texts or other webinars, or a University of Adelaide short course. There can be investments like that you can make without having to have the word DtC on it.
Well, that's why these were 2-day live workshops when we could do them, and I can't tell you how keen I am to get back to running those. But it's unknown now whether those people will come back to those workshops or not, or whether everybody's decided that webinars are good enough. But I frankly believe that if you have people in a room for 2 days and you're all interacting and you're swapping stories and able to actively ask questions, that's 1,000 times better than what we're doing here.
Yeah. Actually, thank you, Peter, for sorry, Prue, but I probably be lynched for not remembering to mention this, but I mean, Wine Australia, through the 50 million package, developed a growing wine tourism workshop, and to be honest, I'm not exactly sure where that's at, because I agree with Peter, it was designed to be delivered, and I'm not sure if it's been created as an off-the-shelf resource. But if anyone is interested, can they please just email me and ask about it, or look on our website for growing wine tourism. And certainly that was all about exactly that, growing wine tourism. So visit based, so not necessarily the digital side of it, but certainly the visitation side of it. We have developed a really good workshop on that. I'm just not sure how you access it right now.
I'll definitely include your contact details on tomorrow's email.
Yeah.
A couple of quick questions before we wrap it up. The first one, in regards to research that's been conducted since the Johann Brewer cellar door research in 2015 by the University of South Australia. And just the question is whether there's been some more current research conducted. I imagine between the two of you, there's certainly lots of...
No, there definitely hasn't. I mean, Johann was a great friend of mine. He was part of the business for quite a long time, and his work was absolutely brilliant. It was just a real pity that he kind of stopped when everything started. He was before his time. But similar sort of research today, going door to door, I think still has a place. I mean, we can do our best to get people to fill in online surveys, but Sandy and I have been doing this for a long time now. We've, between us, tried absolutely everything. But we're never going to get a lot more than this. And we know this from the US. I mean, Sandy was saying they have good numbers in the US. They have 450 out of 9,000 wineries responding, which is about our ratio. So if we want to get proper benchmarks across regions, and that's an exercise that really needs to be put into place with the regions. And certainly I can imagine that regions like Margaret River, McLaren Vale, Barossa, Hunter will be up for that.
Very supportive. Absolutely.
I think there was a business called Morton Blackadder. We're talking 15 years ago now, Adelaide-based business. He used to require businesses to put in their numbers every week, their visitors and their sales and all the rest of it. And wineries did it back in the day when it really wasn't worth doing. And now that we've got all the information and there really ought to be the motivation to do it, there's nothing there. So I guess between Sandy and I, we need to think about how to do more of this and do it better.
Excellent. And the final question, which is more of a marketing question, or very much so, question from Kathy: what are the best systems for marketing automation? I assume she's referring to things like MailChimp and Hootsuite for social media, that kind of thing.
Yeah, for marketing automation, really, HubSpot invented it. And there are endless, boundless resources on HubSpot, so I'd highly recommend it. But the thing with HubSpot is that the moment you start to want to do anything, it starts to cost a hell of a lot of money. And their principal competitor is Infusionsoft, although they've annoyingly changed their name, as these businesses always do, and it's also known as Keep, is considerably better, considerably cheaper than HubSpot. The other thing is that HubSpot, bizarrely, is not a CRM, which is quite strange, really. But Infusionsoft is a CRM, so you don't have to have another CRM product to make the whole thing work. So that's one area that's pretty clear cut. There's only really two big players in the market now. It used to be a business called Marketo, but they seem to have dropped back a little bit. But yeah, they're the two main players in that space.
Wonderful. Okay, well, I think we're going to wrap it up. Thank you again, Peter and Sandy. Your insight and knowledge into the DtC space today has been fantastic, and I'm sure thoroughly enjoyed by all our viewers. Thanks everyone for attending, and your patience with our few little technical glitches along the way there. WCA's final webinar for the year is going to be held on Tuesday, the 9th of November, and details of presenter, etc., will be up on the WCA website later this week. So watch that space. For all WCA members, all past webinar recordings are held at our website in the members section. So please feel free to go and view them there. And if you have any suggestions for webinar topics that you would like us to cover in the program moving into 2022, please email me at wca@winecommunicators.com.au. Thanks again for joining us. Stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you online next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.